parents, they already have kind of a PTSD from whatever happened with their child, which was probably a life-threatening event. Sure, of course they're gonna have that. But then you not only have that, but then there's this onslaught of misinformation, and then it just fuels it, and they feed the fear, right? What we wanna do is combat that with great information, with accurate information, so that it's empowering and educating. Then we can get on kind of a common ground with people and make some progress.
Welcome to the Don't Feed the Fear podcast, where we dive into the complex world of food allergy anxiety. I'm your host, Dr. Amanda Whitehouse, food allergy anxiety psychologist and food allergy mom. Whether you're dealing with allergies yourself or supporting someone who is, join us for an empathetic and informative journey toward food allergy calm and confidence.
When families first started hearing about oral immunotherapy, or OIT, there were only a handful of physicians out there willing to step into that space. Dr. Doug Jones, our guest today, was one of them. He partnered with families, leaned into the science, and worked with his colleagues to help shape what OIT looks like in real-world clinical practice today. Dr. Jones was doing this around the time when I was first looking into OIT for my son about 12 years ago, and so I'm thankful to him and his colleagues who really went out on a limb to provide this treatment for their patients. Dr. Jones is a board-certified allergist, host of the podcast Immune Edit, founder of Fast OIT, a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching allergists how to provide immunotherapy treatments. And more than that, he's been one of the steady hands in a treatment space that has often felt controversial, misunderstood, and emotionally charged. This episode is really exciting for me because it marks the beginning of the second part of our season on choices in allergy treatment. We're going deeper into detailed exploration of specific food allergy treatments, how they work, what the risks are, what the data says, and how to think clearly in considering these options for yourself or for your family. If you are one of the many allergy patients or families feeling caught between do nothing and do everything, I hope that this series of episodes will be helpful for you. Dr. Jones, thank you so much for being here on the Don't Feed the Fear podcast. I'm really honored that you took the time to join me.
Absolutely, it's an honor. Watched your podcast, and it's, fantastic. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. And I've been watching your podcast too, so it's exciting to hear a little bit more of your voice.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're doing a whole big season on treatment options in allergy, but I really wanted you on to speak as one of the top experts on OIT, which I think is an overwhelming and exciting topic for a lot of families who are considering it.
Yeah.
Can we just start, for those who don't know, and I'm already abbreviating it, could you give people a basic background of what OIT is so they can go into the conversation understanding what we're talking about?
Sure. So OIT stands for oral immunotherapy, and it's just used to distinguish various forms. We also have something called SLIT, which is sublingual immunotherapy. So that's a different treatment option that we give. And we kind of start designating that because there's also, not for food, but like for environmental allergies, you have something called subcutaneous immunotherapy, which are like allergy shots. So the oral part is just, what route are we giving it? Is it oral or is it sublingual? Immunotherapy just means it's a therapy that's modulating or changing the immune system. And so later, if you want, we can talk about different treatment options for food that are out there that don't change the immune system, but they're still a treatment option. But oral immunotherapy, again, just means it's oral, it's changing the immune system. And with that therapy, you start out with microscopic amounts of the protein that somebody's allergic to. And with the right timing and dosing and intervals and route, we're able to capture that immune system and guide it along and change it for the benefit of that patient. And so really that's what we're talking about.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think naturally our food allergy brains kind of freeze when we talk about, anything that involves ingesting our allergens. And so I appreciate you getting that out of the way right in the beginning so people can kind of digest that a little bit. So before we dive into the details, would you give us some background on you and how you got into doing what you're doing now?
Sure. Before I get into that, just to address what you just said, which is key, is people are like, and I love your title of your podcast, by the way, like Feed the Fear is awesome, because there's so
Thank you.
much fear out there, and the fear comes from a lot of misunderstanding or marketing or manipulation or whatever. But like with oral immunotherapy or sublingual immunotherapy, there's certain thresholds by which the body will react, and we actually start at doses lower than that. We start at thresholds that are below where you'd react. We capture the immune system, and then we kind of build through that, just so we don't feed the fear.
Thank you. Yes.
uh,
Yeah, and that's why I was trying to get it out there right in the beginning because I think people can just shut down. Like, I'm never doing that with my child. I would never take that risk, but we can talk about the risks later.
right.
But you're right. That idea that we start below the threshold of
Threshold.
reactivity for that individual. We're not
Yeah.
just throwing them into a reaction and deal with it and toughen up kind of perspective.
Right. And there's an organization to it versus a randomness that would occur if you're ingesting that any other way. So that's just kind of getting that out there out of the gates. But for my background, I started my own private practice back in 2008, and just normal run the mill allergy clinic. But then what I started noticing over the course of the following years was, back then it was avoidance, carrier epinephrine, hope that nothing happened. And that's how I was trained. That's all that was really being offered at that point in terms of food allergy. It's not even treatment, it's just management, kind of that passive approach. And as food allergies started to rise and I started seeing more and more people, I got really dissatisfied with the answer that I was giving. I would have patients come in, I would give them the answer, and they would leave, and I would feel sick to my stomach. I was like, what did I just tell them? I'm not helping them in any way. I'm not serving them. All I'm doing is adding to their fear and anxiety. And I thought, I have to change. I have to do something to give a better answer, or at least give an option, a choice, so that people had a choice. And it was about that time that some of the first kind of oral immunotherapy clinical trials were being done. And it was just kind of starting out in some of our conferences that we were hearing about those early trials, but also the doctors that were doing it in private practice. And that's when I first started tapping into this, was like just a couple of years after I finished my clinical training. I'll never forget one day, I had already been taking care of a family, and the son had a peanut and tree nut allergies. And we had the discussions with the parents, but then the parents brought their daughter in who was 11 months old. And she had just had a drop of milk spill on her, and she head to toe hives. And they were nervous because she said we were getting ready for her first birthday cake. And they already had a son. And she said, it is such a tough life of having to avoid peanuts and tree nuts if we have to add milk, because it's individual patients, but it's the family, right? It affects the whole family. And so she said, if we have to add milk to this, I don't know how to handle all of that. And turns out she was milk, egg, wheat, peanut, and tree nuts. And I remember walking in the room that day, and the family was devastated. I was devastated. And the mom looks at me and she's just like, what do we feed our daughter? And I looked at her and I said, I don't know. It was like, whoa, that was a lot. And I just felt so sick to my stomach. They're in tears. And I walked out of my office and I thought I just gave them a massive disservice, and called a mentor in Dallas and said, look, I know you're doing this kind of treatment in clinical practice. I need to learn something. I need to be able to offer something else besides what I just did, because I'm not serving people right now. And whether people did it or not, I wanted them to have a choice to do it. And so he said, yeah, come to Dallas. His name was Richard Wasserman. He said, come to Dallas. Happy to help you, meet with my staff. So I did. Flew to Dallas. I met with him, met with his staff. Shortly thereafter, I flew my staff to Dallas so that they could learn directly from him and his staff. And then we started. We were not the first, but one of those first clinics back in 12 or 2013 is when we started this. And from there, it's just grown. And it's been awesome over the last 12, 13 years to be able to give people a choice and gives them something else if that's what they wanted in their life. And through that, we've been able to connect with families from all over the world and treat patients from all over the United States, many countries, and really build a network. And from that, we were able to, I co founded along with Dr. Wasserman a nonprofit organization that was dedicated to educating allergists and kind of best practices so that we could make sure that this therapy was in the right hands and kind of guard against hopefully bad outcomes and people doing it wrong. And so we've been able to develop that nonprofit, and it's been awesome because from that we've been able to collaborate with doctors from all over. And it's just been fantastic to have that outreach, to have the choices. And now we have many choices that we can offer patients. So that's kind of where I've come from.
I have so many things that I want to say and thank you for, but let's pause there and point out the nonprofit that you started is called FAST, right?
Yes, Food Allergy Support Team, or FAST. Yep.
And I know I personally have benefited from that. I know one of the doctors that I have worked with attends your conferences in Texas every year and brings back new ideas and things every year. And with all of this clinical, observation that you can put together rather than being these isolated little practices, there's so much more to be understood about how things are unfolding, right?
Oh, so much. And the thing I love about our group is, I mean, we are like allergists for allergists who are for patients. And it's just like we truly collaborate. It is a spirit of collaboration. There is no pharmaceutical input, there's no industry sponsors. It's like it is us. And the only agenda we have is making things better for our patients and our practices and advancing that science. And everyone who goes to the meeting, it legit is just that spirit of collaboration of how can we better serve. And it is, to me, it's just been it's the greatest organization to be a part of because it's that grassroots effort where the intentions are right. And to see that spread to help patients across the country and now across the world because we're having doctors from overseas come in, and it's been fantastic.
And just in case people, I want them to understand, they'll hear people talk about the Wasserman protocols, and that's Dr. Wasserman that you established this organization with, right? I want people to connect that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of protocols out there. His were some of the first, and then people will kind of modify those based on their own practice. But that's kind of that foundational piece. And the thing that I've kind of learned over the years is the products and the protocols are the easiest part. And usually when people are starting out, that's their focus. But really, I've kind of found that's the easiest part is everything else that kind of comes into play that can be challenging for some patients.
I'm not saying get hung up on which protocol your doctor is using. I just like people to be familiar with the language that gets thrown around.
100%. And I think that's a really good point out. I think your rapport with your doctor, that trust, their experience, what they're confident in. We always say at our FAST meetings, there's a lot of ways to do this right. And what we're trying to guard against is people from doing it wrong. But we also appreciate and embrace the differences in how different people can do it right. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I think back to what I wanted to say thank you for. You touched on how practice used to look like for you, and it's avoid and epinephrine and hope. And I was one of those parents. My son was diagnosed in 2012, and the hope that we had was, I hope he'll outgrow. And a couple of years of that, and I thought this is not going to cut it. I don't ever mean to discount families who choose not to pursue something, but I just knew for me it wasn't going to work for our family, and
Right.
was scouring and reading about the trials. And it's great. Thank you to the doctors who are doing the clinical trials, but also all of the practitioners like you who just got this to us, who did the work, the legwork to break ground with this new thing. The doctors in my area were shocked when I told them I was reading these studies and I wanted to do this thing. I got kicked out of allergist practices because of it. So I'm so thankful to all the doctors like you who just agreed with us. That's not enough, and we need to do more.
Thank you. That means a lot, and it's also a credit to you for actually persisting and pursuing, and not just accepting perhaps one answer there. I've really loved the partnership that we've had with the food allergy community. And because we have kind of gone hand in hand to break ground on this and said, we absolutely don't need a pharmaceutical industry to dictate this. It's food, and there is power in food. That microscopic amount, when used correctly, can be used for good. And we can do this. We can think, we can apply science, and we can do it safely. And the other thing that we were kind of committed to is early on, we knew we were far, far, far from perfect. And but it was like the more we did and the more we knew, the more questions that we had that we wanted to answer. But it was that collaboration and kind of learning as we go along, where you start at a safe place, but then you mold and you pivot along the way to just make it better and better and safer. And we've done that. And I'm proud of the allergists that took those steps, that have collaborated and really kind of worked together for the benefit of patients.
Yeah, where all of us who have benefited from it are so appreciative, and so many are curious. Can we start to tease that out? Can you explain to people, how do you start with this food and introduce it in a safe way and progress forward with building up their tolerance?
Yeah, so not to get too much into the science of the weeds on this, but in order for like an allergic reaction to occur, there has to be certain things that happen within the body. And there has to be like a certain size of protein, and it matters what route the exposure is occurring. What we're doing with immunotherapy, whether it's oral or sublingual, is we're able to capture the dose, the route, and the frequency in an organized fashion, not random, but in an organized fashion. And again, starting at doses that are sub threshold, meaning below a threshold by which you react. And you can start just training that immune system with those very early doses. And with the correct timing and route and dosing, we're able to then just kind of raise the threshold by which somebody reacts. And as we take our time and proceed with caution, we're able to increase the amounts of food and the safety, because we're basically raising the threshold by which somebody would react to a certain food. And with oral immunotherapy in particular, we can get it to a point where they can consume that food in unlimited amounts without avoidance. There's misconceptions being put out there that you don't get to that point, but you can. And there's many allergists across the country that absolutely can get you to a point, if you want, to where you can eat that in unlimited amounts without the avoidance.
I want to chime in on that because I can testify that I'm one of those people with oral immunotherapy. My son got to
Mm.
quote unquote free eating. What does that mean? But he did a 24 peanut challenge. He passed, he got the clearance to eat it, and he doesn't want to.
Yeah, I
He
know,
doesn't want to eat.
I know.
And I think, I don't, do you think that's part of the misconception? Because
Yeah,
so many kids avoiding it for so long don't
yes.
want to eat it. They just want to be safe.
Yes, exactly. And what I always tell people is now we're at a point where we really can individualize therapy. And it's like instead of trying to put everyone in a certain protocol, it's not a one size fits all. I always say, let's find the size that fits the one, right? Let's find that size that fits the family and meet patients and meet people where they are and decide, where do you want to go? And let's find that treatment protocol or method that's going to get you to where you want to go. And to your point, I mean, think about if if you didn't even have an allergy, but you just got food poisoning. Let's say you had food poisoning to a bad piece of chicken or some yogurt that sat out too long. You have a bad association with that, right? You're kind of scarred. And it's like you hesitate eating that. And I've had that a couple of times actually with strawberry yogurt. And it's like, I don't like strawberry yogurt anymore because of that. And it's like, well, imagine having a life threatening reaction to something like that and what mentally, emotionally you have to overcome. And it's like, well, maybe they don't want it, but they still want the safety. And so it's like, that's okay. That's okay. And I think part of that mental thing too is you don't have to free eat if you don't want to. You can, and that choice is there. But if you want to just have safety, that's great too. And that's kind of where You can take OIT to a certain level, or you could do sublingual and have that. But again, that's where let's find, instead of the one size fits all, let's find the size that fits the one and that fits you and that person and your goals and your family, and let's guide you there.
I would think your patients would have so much more success with that approach too, rather than here's how we do it in our office and show up at this time, we do this much. It's to individualize it in that way.
Yes.
To get on my psychologist pedestal, that's what makes people feel safe. This is about me, and my voice matters in this conversation.
Yeah, and also it's like we have to remember that food treatment's not about me. It's about the patient. And it's about what they want and what their goals are and what their life is. My job is to guide them there. Whatever those goals are, I'm going to be fluent in all of the treatment options, whether it's SLIT or OIT or the use of what we call biologics or the combination. It's like what I need to do is stay on top of it, be fluent in all of the options so that I can present those options, pros, cons, and just say, what's the reality? And now let's match that to your goals and let's see where you want to go with it. And how can we realistically get you there?
This is a little off track, but I'm curious because you have so much experience with it.
Mhm.
I love SLIT. We're going to be doing some
Oh,
episodes about SLIT as
great.
well. I'm a huge proponent of that being a
Awesome.
part of the puzzle, but it's even harder than OIT for people to find. Is there a reason why, and are more doctors, do you think, going to be offering it as well in time? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have a lot of perspective on it. So, um, SLIT, way back, if you go back, this makes me sound really old, but way back 10,
I'm
12
there
years
with you. Don't
ago,
worry.
10, 12 years ago, when things are kind of starting to formulate with food allergy treatment, OIT kind of took off first. And a lot of it was because we had this perception of something that you alluded to before is, oh my, okay, my child can eat the 24 peanuts. Uh, but now we find out they really don't want to. They really don't want any of that. Well, we had the idea that, as we're starting the therapy, that once it's in the diet, everyone would want to eat it. Why wouldn't you? Well, that was early on. And so to get you to the free eating, we needed to do the oral immunotherapy. And so this kind of takes off. Sublingual lags because you can't, in order to free eat on sublingual, you probably have to do it a very long time. It's slow, right? And so it doesn't take off as quickly. But then you fast forward several years after those of us that started with OIT, we're kind of realizing, hold on, not everyone wants to just free eat it. They don't like it. They don't want to do it. They just want the safety. Then all of a sudden, sublingual starts taking off because that's a great option in that case. Plus, we also find out, with OIT, you have certain restrictions after you dose. You have like an exercise restriction. Maybe there's a few more reactions that people may have. Well, a SLIT, you don't have an exercise restriction. And so there's a little more freedom. You're kind of trading like, what do you want in life? Daily dosing, a little more freedom with the SLIT, but yet you're still going to have to kind of avoid that food or bridge it to OIT? Or do you want the little more dosing restrictions, but then at the end have that freedom of eating? And I think the lesson is we had to start with something, which we did. But the beauty from all of this is as we started with something and developed it, we learned a lot and we've listened to patients and we've heard it. And so now you see more and more people now adopting SLIT. And I can tell you in our FAST group, we do surveys every year. And over the last 2, 3 years, we've seen a massive uptake of allergists now that are very interested in SLIT, that are learning SLIT, that are going to be incorporating that into their practice. And so you're going to see this catch up. So is it as available now? No, not as much. But you will see it. I predict in the next 2, 3 years, SLIT is going to be as available as OIT.
And I think that will be a huge part of bridging the mental leap that we have to take for some people. Some people just want to dive in and it's not an issue. But can you talk about that in terms of not specific to SLIT, but just what you see as the barriers in terms of the fear and the anxiety that your patients have about consuming their allergens?
I think a lot of it just starts with misinformation, maybe that's out there. I actually co-founded a clinic in Australia. So I co-founded it there. And what I found is particularly in that country is there was so much misinformation and so much fear that was being put into patients. That is a massive, massive barrier that we've had to overcome. I mean, it's everywhere, but it was interesting to see, like, per country or per region, even the narrative that's being put out. And a lot of it's just misunderstanding food allergy, misunderstanding testing, misunderstanding the treatment, and just not having that accurate representation of it. And I always say it can be scary, but we want to be prepared, not scared. We want to just have that knowledge and understanding so that we're empowered with it, not scared by it. And I think that's been the biggest thing that I've tried to do through social media, podcast, whether it's through fast or whatever, is we're just trying feverishly to combat misinformation. Because I think once parents, they already have kind of a PTSD from whatever happened with their child, which was probably a life-threatening event. Sure, of course they're going to have that. But then you not only have that, but then there's this onslaught of misinformation or people maybe feeding a fear, and it's like then it just fuels it, and they feed the fear, right? And it's like what we want to do is combat that with great information, with accurate information, so that it's empowering and educating. Then we can get on kind of a common ground with people and make some progress.
Can we touch on what I think one of those biggest ones is? I
Sure.
think most of my audience, especially those who are either doing it and still afraid or afraid to try it, that idea that my child can have a reaction. I hear about, people doing OIT and they have a reaction, or even they might have a reaction so severe that they need to use their epinephrine. Would you talk about that one, please?
Yeah. And that's a legitimate concern. It is a risk. It's something people need to know about. I always say we want to act like the military, where we want to be prepared for worst case scenarios, not most likely. So again, being prepared. So, is there a risk of reacting in oral immunotherapy? Absolutely. But there's a risk to you no matter what. You can try to do everything perfect in life by avoiding and still have an accidental exposure, still have an accidental ingestion, still come across something that's you don't know about. And usually those types of situations are not when you're going to expect it. It's going to happen when you're at a ball game, when you're at a birthday party, when you're at some kind of social event or social gathering. I had so many people that would order these like macadamia nut cookies from Costco and never be told that there's actually cashews in those things, right? And they're reacting and it's inadvertent. So that risk of reaction is there no matter what you do. But when you start with therapy, we're now dosing at a time when you're monitored, when you know what you're doing, when you're at home, when there's protocols in place, there's safety measures there, and it's predictable. And the risk is still really low. The risk of reaction, even though it's there, it's low. And I would argue the risk of reaction in OIT is probably less than your risk of an accidental exposure without OIT, but at least we're doing something and taking that. And if it does happen, it's at a time that's pretty predictable most of the time. And so you have control over the situation, whereas on the other side, you may not have that control. And a lot of fear comes from unknown and not feeling in control. This is known and you're in control. That makes a big difference.
You sound like a psychologist. If it weren't annoying for people to listen to, I would applaud you. Fear grips us so much, we think of that, but we forget that it's not forever. It's for a prescribed period of
Is
time as we move, and then the balance tips the other direction. And I can attest to that. My son did have anaphylaxis and need an EpiPen at one point during his OIT, and I wouldn't change it. And I would still say, as you described, the worry for those 2.5 hours during and after dosing, knowing what to look for and having my doctor's,
Mhm.
instructions in my hand of what to do is a completely different experience than worrying all the time everywhere we go infinitely for the rest of his life. So, it's a trade-off that for me was absolutely worth it.
Agreed. Yeah.
From the mental health side, what do you think helps to set patients up beforehand as far as preparation, and then during the treatment, what helps them not to be gripped by the anxiety, not to be overwhelmed by that from your perspective as their doctor?
One of the analogies that I give with my patients all the time is, for me, OIT is kind of like flying in an airplane. And you have a start, you have a flight, and you have kind of that destination. And flying can be scary for some people. Well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if that happens? Well, what happens though before every flight is there's pre-flight checks, not only for the plane and the crew and everything else, but they're also checking the weather. And, are there any storms ahead? And what altitude do we need to go at? And so you're making all these pre-flight checks. And before somebody doses, we actually do that. You're having these pre-flight checks or these pre-dose checks. Is my child healthy? And you go through all these checks. Why? Because we want to make sure that flight is as turbulent free as possible. But even if there is turbulence, it's okay because we can change the altitude, or we have measures that we can take to address whatever that turbulence or whatever those issues are. And by and large, flying is safer than driving in a car. And to me, it's like doing OIT is going to be better and statistically better than not. And then you're going to get to your destination and really enjoy that, as opposed to just staying at home all the time and continuing to live in fear. And so part of that is, yes, I think we have to acknowledge, first of all, the fear, and acknowledge where they're at and validate that and say, yes, absolutely, you're going to feel that way. I completely understand. This can be absolutely terrifying. I think just acknowledging that that's there, absolutely. But let's walk through this and let's see, like, okay, what's the next step? What's the next step? Okay, if this happens, then what? Then what are we going to do? And so we talk through it so that people are educated and prepared again. So now they're more comfortable. And I think that's, to me, just kind of the key.
That's so helpful. I love that analogy, and I'm gonna steal it and use it as well because I think we forget about that. We don't know when we haven't tried it.
Right.
People who haven't gone into it don't understand that there's this whole structure around it,
There is.
um, you know, to protect us.
There's so much structure. And what's awesome too is, the oldest patient that I ever treated, this was about 10 years ago, he was 65 at the time. And he was a retired orthopedic surgeon. And he came mainly because his wife was so tired of reading labels, meal prep. She was the one that was doing a lot of the grocery shopping, and they traveled a lot, and she was the one vetting the restaurants. He didn't care, but she did. So she gets him involved. But the point of the story is, towards the end, he said, "Can I bring a colleague of mine with me to my next visit?" And I was like, "Sure, I don't care." And so he brought another doctor colleague of his who was a surgeon. And what he wanted him to do is, he's like, watch his team, watch the nurses. And he's like, they take more care of these doses and their checks and their double checks and the structure and all of that. It's more vigilant than what happens in the OR, and even guarding like the narcotics in the OR and all of the precautions. He's like, there is more structure and care that's happening here than there. And it was so profound. Like, he wanted to bring a colleague to see it. And I guess I would communicate that to patients, in that there is so much structure, there's so much care, and the double checks and this and that, and really trying to enhance that safety. for patients, it's always the safety first.
That's a really cool story. I
Yeah.
want you to expand on that because I think people have another misconception that adults can't do OIT.
Right. Yeah, adults can do OIT, and we've treated many, many of them successfully. And a lot of the focus is on children or on peanut, but it's like there's more than one food allergy, and adults can do it. Young adults can do it, older adults can do it. Adults pose, they have a unique set of circumstances because often there's significant others involved, and it absolutely impacts them. And then you have work and travel and different things, and it's like they need options too. And a lot of them, it may not just be OIT, but SLIT may be a nice option for adults because they're at a time of their life where I don't really care about if I'm consuming the food every day, but I just want safety and I want to be able to go to a restaurant and not worry about some cross contaminant, on the menu or this or that, or their spouse or significant other doesn't want to have to. And so that's where now that we have a menu to pick from for food allergy treatment, it's nice because we can offer a lot of options for adults as well.
What other barriers are there? You talked a little bit there about adults. What else makes it harder or more challenging for people to try and succeed with OIT?
I think right now is just trying to find doctors close to them that are willing to work with them. I've just started a clinic where we're trying to overcome some of those barriers by offering telehealth options. I'm licensed now, and there's an interstate compact where you can do telehealth. And so I'm licensed in many, many states, trying to take the care to the patient so that if they live in rural Montana or rural Wyoming or somewhere where they don't have access, they still have access. And so access is still a barrier, even though it's grown quite a bit, it's still a barrier. I'm very actively involved in trying to break those barriers down of not only offering the care that way, but also offering to work with their doc. If their doc doesn't know about it, it's like, well, we have a whole system set up to where you can come in and learn and basically implement this into your practice. So I think if we can just expand our access, that's better. Breaking down the misinformation so that people realize there's docs all across the country that are offering this. There's hundreds across the United States, and it's expanding. And maybe psychologically, there's those barriers that they have to overcome. But I think the more correct information that we get out there to empower people, the more we can break some of those barriers down.
Yeah. What's the easiest way for people to find a doctor who does offer treatment?
They can go on fastoit.org. That's our nonprofit website. And we actually have a map on fastoit.org where a lot of the doctors that have attended our conferences can be listed on there. And that's probably a great starting point. If they go on that website and still can't find somebody, maybe reach out to me because I'm connected with so many docs across the country. Usually I can find somebody for them or try and help in any way that I can. So, they're welcome to reach out to me. Check fastoit.org.
And will you tell people how they can follow you and contact you in order to do that?
Yeah, at Dr. Doug Jones on Instagram is probably the best. That's kind of where I focus social media on. They could also go to my website, just drddougjones.com. There's a little thing they can fill out if they have a question or, need some information. Reach out. Don't hesitate. I'm honestly here to help, whether it's me directly helping or aligning them with a colleague of mine. I'm more than happy to do those things.
Yeah, and I would encourage following you, following the people who are actually doing this on social media and like you said, dispelling myths and getting good information. I think someone who's on the fence, if they follow you for a while and hear you talk about it,
Mm.
warm up to the idea, I think it would be very helpful for them.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And, you can follow along easy enough. And hopefully, as we dispel the myths, you get a little more comfort with it. And we want a nice community that we can build here. So, yeah.
All right, I have one last question that I'm really excited to ask you, given what an authority you are on this topic, because we hear a lot of different responses to this question. Is there anyone who cannot do OIT, who is not a candidate?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's just a few absolute contraindications, but to me, I look at them as temporary because uncontrolled asthma is a main risk, uncontrolled eczema or hives, or really severe kind of anxiety surrounding this may make somebody temporarily not a great candidate for OIT. But again, I look at those as temporary because if your asthma is uncontrolled or eczema or hives or anxiety is so severe that it's out of control, let's work to get those controlled. Now you can become a candidate for that. And so even those absolute contraindications, I think are really workable. And there's a lot of measures that we can take, whether it's therapy, whether it's just utilizing different treatment options to get those underlying conditions better controlled. Yeah, now you're a candidate. Once we have a lot of these underlying issues controlled and maintained, yeah, I can't really think of somebody that we couldn't do it in.
You're not saying EOE. Can you explain your perspective on, because a lot of people think that's I have EOE, I have to stop, or I can't try it.
Right. And a lot of docs may not have experience with utilizing food allergy treatments in patients with EOE. I have experience with it. So I've treated many, many patients successfully with food allergy treatments, whether it's SLIT or OIT, who have EOE. So it can be done. It's what we call a relative contraindication. And it's relative because it's not absolute, but it does need to be done with caution, and there's certain things that I kind of measure before and during. It may take a little longer, but by and large, a vast majority of those patients can do it. Maybe not to all of the foods, because there might be some of the foods that if you're getting it in the diet, it's just triggering the EOE. But in patients with EOE, if they're having to do, like, for instance, a 4 to 6 food elimination diet, but we can get 4 of those foods back in the diet, that makes a difference. And so it's not absolute, and we've had tremendous success with so many patients with EOE, and it again, even if we're getting 90% of the foods back in the diet, it just makes a big difference for the family.
Right, for the family, not just
Mhm.
that individual, but think of the parents, like you mentioned earlier, feeding 2,
Right.
3, 4 kids in the household and getting egg and milk back is a huge win. If you can
Yeah.
introduce wheat and you couldn't have it before, what a
Mhm.
change for everyone in that family.
Yeah, and the other thing too is we have great medications now that are available now that weren't available 10 years ago, to where we can get the EOE better controlled and expand the diet. And if you have to take the medication, it's like, so be it. Because if you can expand your diet, make yourself safe, get rid of that fear, the anxiety, and live a more normal life, great. Let's do it. If that's something you want to do, we just have better things at our disposal to control the underlying EOE now.
That's just really encouraging. The whole conversation, I think, is gonna give many people more hope than, like we said before, the hope used to just be, "Let's wait and see if you outgrow it," which was unlikely, and I think the way you discuss it is really reassuring for people, so thank you so much. What do you wanna leave people with for final thoughts on the topic?
I've loved the questions. I've loved the discussion. I think it's been pretty thorough. Just know that there is a menu for food allergy treatment now. There's a lot of options. We're making inroads every day to try and make it more available to patients. There's a great network. I've got a lot of great colleagues, and we're dedicated to trying to create more normalcy for people in their life. Instead of feeding the fear, let's feed the body. Let's get over this and get you shopping at all the aisles in the grocery store. It's been a great discussion, so thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you to you. Thank you to all the amazing doctors out there who are doing this.
Yeah,
It's life-changing for so many people. I appreciate having you so much.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you to my amazing guest, Dr. Jones. I was so honored to have you here on the show and kick things off with you, one of the people who kicked off OIT here in the US. We'll be saying it on the podcast all of this season. More choice can mean clarity, but it can also mean more overwhelm. If this episode raised questions for you, that's not a bad thing. It means you're engaging thoughtfully. If this episode made you feel anxious, you're considering something that's slightly outside of your comfort zone that might bring about change in your life. Here are 3 next steps. Number 1, follow Dr. Doug Jones. You can find him on Instagram at Dr. Doug Jones. Visit his website, which is the same, drddougjones.com, and check out his podcast, Immune Edit, for thoughtful conversations about immunology and allergy care. Number 2, if you're curious about OIT, visit fastoit.org. You'll find a directory of other physicians who also offer immunotherapy, including OIT and sublingual immunotherapy, or SLIT, so that you can explore whether it's an option for your family. Number 3, if what you're wrestling with is the mental and the emotional weight of these decisions, all of these interviews I've been doing to prepare for this season inspired me to write a workbook to walk you step by step through the mental and relational side of choosing and navigating treatment. It isn't just a medical decision, it's a life decision for you and your whole family. You can find my workbook called From Fear to Freedom, A Guide to Navigating Allergy Immunotherapy, on Amazon. If you're considering buying it, I would encourage you to consider supporting your local bookstore by ordering through them or through bookshop.org. I'll put the link in the show notes. As always, your likes, shares, subscribing to the show, ratings and reviews wherever you listen help to keep the show growing, and I appreciate them so much. I will talk to you next week. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any questions about your own medical experience or mental health needs, please consult a professional. I'm Dr. Amanda Whitehouse. Thanks for joining me. And until we chat again, remember, don't feed fear.